All right, so Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim and Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, everyone. Inshallah, today we're going to continue speaking about the pearls of the Prophet ﷺ. And last time we actually went over the subjects, of course, relating to, well, how can we support our Iman? How can we make sure that we're not getting absorbed and sucked into the challenges, whether we're speaking about desires or whether we're speaking about different misconceptions, because there's a difference between shubuhat and shahawat. So we went in details in regards to the shahawat and the different desires, but still, of course, when we're speaking about different desires, you still want to remember that what could probably be a desire to me might still be a desire to you, but it's probably not your main, let's call it fitna. The fitna, and I want to use the word fitna for a bit here because this is a key word that we didn't comment on last time. So the word fitna actually comes from the root fatana. Let me write down that word. So the root is fatana. The root fatana actually means to expose. Okay, but what it was usually used for was to expose on to heat. And in particular, that's actually talking about gold, that they would expose it on heat, because you want to remember when they go into the mines where gold is found, the gold would basically be in small particles or in strings, it depends on the area, and it would be connected to all the pebbles, all the soil, etc. But in order to get pure gold and away from all of those pebbles and all of those soil particles, they would, because of course the gold would melt at a certain temperature, but the soil and the rocks don't melt at that, well, they don't melt at a temperature. So therefore, they would expose it on gold, and the gold would basically melt. They would get that into a liquid, and then what stays within, of course, the top, or what stays within, I guess they're kind of like a sieve, would basically be the rocks, the stones, the different particles that are coming from the earth. So that's what it means to do fitna. Fitna is to expose on a challenge in order to get refined. Okay, in order to get refined, but there are some that would get sucked in with, of course, with the heat, and probably instead of getting refined, they would get sucked in, and they would connect to the different challenges instead of get refined. So when you're looking at fitna, certainly fitna can be good for some, because it could probably alleviate their level. It could get them into a higher level because it refined them for the first stage. They'll probably come across on another exposure on heat, probably, and then that would refine them again and again. Every single time they would pass this exposure, then they would become refined and they would become purer. So just think of it this way. But many would get sucked in with this challenge because, of course, they probably did not have their intention in place, or probably were sucked in where they probably liked that fitna and got sucked into it without them realizing it was supposed to be getting them farther and higher up in the refine, but they chose to get sucked down. All right. So that's one thing. So we talked about desires, and we also talked about the misconceptions. So the misconceptions, we said when we were talking about those misconceptions, there are two kinds of misconceptions. We said there are certain misconceptions that require a type of an education, or that would require that the person would do a study. It let's call it a mental misconception. And there's another type of misconception, and that's what we focused on last time, which is a psychological misconception, that the majority, it's not that they're really confused about something that requires some research, some specialists to sit with them and make it clear to them, and probably maybe talk about let's say atheism, where we probably need to explain to them the Darwin theory and probably explain theodicy and the problem with theodicy, and probably talk to them about the existence of God, etc., all these different things. Many times this does happen where people are confused, thinking that, yes, this person needs a specialist, and then they would take them to specialists, but then the parent would come to me, or probably the person himself would come to me and not realize that the problem wasn't actually with the misconception. In other words, it wasn't confusion in the idea, it was more of a psychological issue, which is very common right now with a younger generation, is specifically girls and women, that they're really looking for social acceptance rather than an actual misconception. Many times they'll get sucked into that misconception, but what really led them to it is the social acceptance piece of it. And of course, right now, what is really used, especially in the age of postmodernism, is using narrative instead of logic. So you would be trying to probably talk, and I came across this many times and very often on college campuses. You would perhaps want to speak about the logic, for example, that God didn't create you in a confused, let's say, confused sex, for example, and that God Almighty created you male, female, your chromosomes, your bones, that the whole structure, your anatomy is all female or all male. Unless you were intersex, that's a different story. But then if you were to use that logic and you were to go down that road, of course, you will then be accused of being intolerant and not inclusive to people's orientation, and the list goes on and on, because at that moment, you want to keep in mind that the society had been so brainwashed into needing, and that you must use a narrative than actually a logic. The second that you would get into logic, even if you were to infer a certain logic, that's when you would probably be attacked as being judgmental, intolerant of people's orientation, and that somehow you are uneducated to be inclusive and so forth. And this is so common. So the second that you would use the path of logic or any, of course, mental, evidences, that's when you will be attacked. And I would say, if I were to classify the different departments, I would say right now, the most department that is really being sucked in within such narrative and within such I would say misconception is really one more of humanities, more of literature, philosophy. Well, philosophy, no, because they can't fool them much with it, because they're of course, the second that they're going to get into postmodernism, philosophy, no. In fact, I truly wish they could add philosophy classes to the humanities department, because then they would be capable of recognizing a lot of the misconceptions that are I would say, put into their classes, and that they're indoctrinated with it. So you've got psychology department is probably the most department that it is presented to them that this is what science proves, especially the undergrad, that this is what science proves, and this is what studies say, and therefore you have to absorb it. The literature, the feminist studies, the global studies, those are the most studies that that, or the most departments that really get sucked into those programs without them realizing, and it is presented more of a narrative. And of course, if you were to go to the other departments, medical school, it's not easy to fool those students that this is all fake, and that's not what science proves. I did not see that the medical department, the medical students were confused with all of this, because they know that you are male or female to the DNA, and you cannot use narratives to fool them. They definitely recognize that. Medical students were really smart to recognize that. Biology students, well, they got sucked in. They got sucked into the evolution, but still, it was not easy to get them sucked in. But then again, that seahorse theory kind of gets them confused so many times. Like, okay, well, this is a seahorse who's right there acting differently. Can you explain all of that? And then, of course, when they, you want to keep in mind that the atheists, they considered that the biggest challenge to their theory or to their idea on atheism was actually sex, believe it or not, was actually the human reproduction. How is it that this male had evolved in such a way and the female evolved in such a way, yet they both need together in order to form one human being? How is it that they could evolve differently? If you were going to say that they had evolved, how is it that they evolved differently, yet they need one another for reproduction? So yes, that's a different story. But I guess this is important when we're speaking about misconception. Didn't go enough about that. But of course, the psychology department, I would say, was probably the one that is right now, I guess, the heavily indoctrinated department. And sorry about that, everybody. But unfortunately, this is what I had. This is what I had seen in the literature department. Were probably the most that really got absorbed in it in a way where the students within probably year two, they're right there. You just have to accept this. If you dare say anything, the professors will corner you. The departments themselves, they would choose the certain professors that would agree with their ideologies, with their approach anyways. So if you were, let's say, a Muslim, okay, if you were a Muslim that didn't agree with such approach, you would not get hired. You would not get hired within those departments. And if you are hired, you recognize that you play the game their way or you're going to get fired. In other words, you end up playing the game their way, or we're going to basically unemploy you. And therefore, you need to recognize that the department right now is assigned to play and to do a certain job. And that's why what I had seen on campus, to be honest, in working on campus as a staff is completely different when you are a student. When you're a student, you just see the classes and you're just so busy running to the classes. You see this is a professor, they're qualified to teach this subject, and that's it. But when you're a staff and looking at the other end, no, you recognize that the whole idea of staffing, the whole idea of who's chosen as a faculty, who passes the interview, and who, it's a certain idea that controls the system to consider, well, here's our agenda and this is who we're going to hire. So it's not necessarily that this person has the degree for it and that's it. No, it's not that if you have the degree for it, it's, of course, we're going to interview you to make sure that you align with our agenda. That's the way it goes. And certainly, just keep that in mind. Certainly, you would see many of our Muslim students, they would go to the university and not recognize that there is an agenda, and they would just think that, well, this is what science proves. This is what studies say. This is what is supposed to be education. Because, I mean, an educational institution, or so it appears, without you realizing, it's many times, it depends on which department, it can actually be an indoctrinational institution that is mixed with an educational element in order to make it appear that it's educational alone. They would definitely fuse the two together, and without you realizing, especially the undergrad. Graduates and postgraduates are different, because when you go into the graduate level, then you start researching, and then you're capable of recognizing that a lot of what you're being told, or what your professor had told you, is not necessarily factual, and is requiring a lot of research, and that a lot of what is presented is not necessarily based on, let's call it, objective research, and that some of it is backed up by certain lobbying. So I guess postgraduates are, are a different level, where they're capable of going behind and in the back end. And when they go to the back end and they start realizing, it's like, okay, so those are the different substances that you were using, and this is what you used to use in order to cook all of this for the masses. So then you're capable of getting to, let's call it, the organic elements, and you're capable of scrutinizing a lot of these elements, and you're capable of dissecting and researching a lot of what was being presented. For the graduates, they'll basically get a cooked material. The undergrads, they get a cooked material. But for the postgraduates, no, they get to go to the back end and go to the back room and really see what is the substance, that, and how was it cooked, and whether it was actually organic or not, and whether this material was actually based on research, or is it based on lobbying. So yeah. All right. So we basically did the misconceptions, but we're talking about the psychological misconceptions, let's say it that way. So we said that psychological misconceptions, there are a number of different things that can put the person within that area. So the psychological misconception, or the psychology of misconceptions, is the Prophet was basically letting us know that psychology misconception is not of any less dangerous in its danger. Of course, it's not in any way that is less than the actual argument, and confusing that argument. So just keeping that one in mind. Okay. The other thing that comes with it, we talked about mukhalatat ahl al-shar, and what comes, of course, with the psychological misconception in the psychology of, well, of course, wanting to get that social acceptance, comes with it, of course, hanging out with the wrong people, whether we're speaking about people of shahawat or people of shubuhat. So people of shahawat are people of lust, people of shubuhat are people of misconceptions. Okay, so those are the two kinds of people that would basically come in and probably be a place of fitna, a place of challenge right there. So let's say we talked about how the ayat were telling us, well, there are certain people that you really have to avoid, and not necessarily consider that, well, they're family, or they're probably, on college campuses, or whatever it is, that some people you just have to take a stance to completely avoid, because it is part of your nature. It is part of course, your human nature, that you adapt to the society that surrounds you. In other words, if you put yourself within a society that is living the misconception, you're going to find yourself absorbing such misconceptions without you realizing, because it is part of your brain. It's part of your instinct. It's part of your brain. It's how your brain was wired. It's how you are wired yourself, that you would adapt to the society that surrounds you. And certainly such adaptation, if it was going to be at the expense of your faith, then you actually put yourself within this environment. And therefore, in order to protect your deen, that's what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was letting us be aware of. Sometimes you have to take the courageous step in order to basically determine, before you get into your brain adapting to that society and you somehow, I guess, adjusting to their thoughts, etc. It's important that you would take a courageous step and from the beginning just avoid this group and just don't sit with them, especially if they're spewing all those misconceptions or all those, let's call them shahawat or misbehaviors, etc. Make sure you avoid such a group. And then we would probably sometimes need to not just avoid them during that time, because if you realize that these people are sucked into such a lifestyle, such misconceptions, you need to find another group of people, another environment, another group of friends, just so that that new friend would basically have the power to also help you grow in your faith. Because remember, just as you wanted to not adapt to that group, well, put yourself in another group to adapt to a new society. Okay, so use that element that your brain is powered to adapt, and then put yourself with a group that probably is concerned about faith, a group that's probably wanting to grow about their deen, and a group that's probably wanting talab al-ilm, and you're going to see yourself even in the beginning where it might seem that that's too advanced for you, or it might seem that it's probably too hard for you to understand, or probably maybe just another level that you're not like that. Shaitan will come to you and tell you, well, you're not like that person. You're just a hypocrite sitting amongst them. And for a second, you will feel that you'll hate yourself sitting in that group, because Shaitan had convinced you that you're just not as good as those people. You're not as religious. You know that you have sins. You are not fitting in. So this is not who you are. You should get out. Do not get out. That's Shaitan's way, because he recognizes that your brain is wired, and that you are wired to adapt to the society that you put yourself in. And certainly he does not want you to adapt to khair. He doesn't want you to adapt to what is good. So in the beginning, you're going to feel like this light is too bright for you, and it's not going to be within your capacity to engage and even open your eyes in such light, but it just takes time. Let your eyes adjust to the new brightness, to the new light, and inshallah, you'll fit in. And you want to keep in mind, if you want to grow and you want to be successful, be around successful people, and studies tell you that you will increase your rate and your probability, or even your percentage of being successful, by 15% or by 30%, depends on how much you engage with them. So in other words, that's the same thing with religion. If you engage with people that are طلاب ilm, with students of ilm, you're going to see that it's going to be intimidating for you to get into, I guess, being patient in listening to the boring class, or probably to the long class, or whatever it is. You'll get intimidated because someone else is doing it. Someone else is being patient. Well, so why can't I? I can probably sit longer too. Or maybe someone else doesn't understand what I'm also not understanding, but they're still sitting down. Well, that means there's a chance that I can probably become like that student who understands everything. If I were to stay longer, if I were to, I guess, be patient in talab al-ilm, little by little, I'll definitely be capable of expanding my vision. I'll be capable of expanding my knowledge, and little by little, I'll grow. I just have to be patient, because there's no way that you can do any form of success, no matter what it is, whether you wanted to become a doctor, whether you wanted to become, I don't know, a Hafidh al-Quran, whatever it is, it's always that perseverance. It's always that, of course, stamina. It's always the grit that you really have to invest in order for you to stay and be successful. It's not necessarily your intelligence. It's not necessarily your IQ level. We can have somebody with a low IQ, but with their perseverance, with their grit, with their stamina, they were capable of going farther than someone that probably had a high IQ and did not use it. Okay, so yeah, there you go. And that's the same thing. So by you determining the environment is basically the first step, the first start to you determining on what, let's say, result you're trying to get to. What is the result? What is the final destination that you're trying to get to? It really starts with you determining which group you want your brain, you want your heart, you want, of course, yourself to adapt to. So therefore, the ayat were basically telling us, well, be careful from getting sucked in and absorbed with the people that are probably mocking the ayat, that are probably engaging in different types of sin, whether that is internal. In other words, we're talking about somebody that's internally ill. You could see that the subjects, you could see that those messages that they're really sending are really perverted. And just by you realizing that this person is perverted in their vision, perverted in their behavior, definitely not living the principle of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then you really have to make a hard and a tough and also a courageous decision to just say, this isn't what I'm looking for. This isn't what I'm looking for, because if you don't make that, let me say, courageous and that strong decision, you're going to see yourself that you're just going to adapt to their lifestyle. And they're going to appear, and a lot of these people, they would come in with a type of personality like they are tough. So you would go to prison, for example. Okay, you would see in prisons that the guys that are the most deviant guys would present themselves like they are tough. They'd be the ones to work out. They'd be the ones to probably bully. They'd be the ones to probably have their group, and they would definitely have a group. And that's why the guys in prisons, they would form, of course, a Muslim coalition. This is real, everybody. This is what they do in prisons. Because if you don't have a group to support you and protect you, you can get really bullied. And I mean, in a very ugly way. And you would be really surprised in what actually goes on in prisons. Prisons are, I would say, prisons are the institutions that are not necessarily correctional facilities, but they're actually the facilities where you enter it, you become a trained, a trained drug dealer, a trained probably rapist, a trained felon, the list goes on and on. So those institutions are, I would say, teaching them how to become even worse than ever before. That's why you would see the ones to go into prisons are the most that will most likely come back to it. Because the prisons themselves, believe it or not, the prisons themselves were actually the ones that were calling us. So I would get the prison to call me. In order for us to engage in prison chaplaincy and all of that in order to help them, I guess, do a certain type of correction. Certainly they don't pay us for it, but at the end of the day, just keep that in mind, because they do recognize that this institution is bringing about more people that are coming back into it than actually getting them out of this, than actually learning a lesson that this is really ugly. You definitely don't want to come back to it, but they end up coming back to it because those people, they like to present themselves that what makes you strong is that if you were to be, I guess, not necessarily straight in your behavior. I'm not here talking about straight in meaning meaning that a person is, sexually straight, but I'm talking about straight meaning following the principles of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and doing the right thing. But you'll be convinced that the strong ones are the ones that basically know how to bend around and certainly not follow the law and not follow the rules. Those are the strong ones. Those are the smart ones. Those are the ones that just don't surrender to others and don't surrender, not to the police, not surrender to the correctional services or whatever it is. They don't surrender because they've got the stamina, because they are strong because of this. And, just keep that in mind, that a lot of these people will not just prisons, but that's also the same even when you're talking about college campuses as well. So on college campuses, you would see the bullies, even though they're bullies, but you would see that they're the ones with the I guess, the perseverance. They're the ones that are presenting power, presenting authority, presenting somewhat that they're actually in the highest level of stamina. And people will many times, of course, maybe I could also talk about a lobby, the LGBT lobby. Its motto is basically pride. It's being proud, it's being strong. And even when they talk within their groups, it's always trying to show them and convince them that you're strong, you got to stand out there, you got to do this. And it's always trying to convince them, even though, hey, they're definitely feeling guilty on the inside. But of course, Shaitan has his ways in order to make you, instead of feeling guilty about a sin, but just wanting to somehow come forward like you're of strength. That what inspires you to be stronger is sin. That's what Shaitan wants to get to you. And many times that's what happens, that the whole psychology that Shaitan plays on you is that what inspires you to be stronger is basically the sin itself. And that's what Fir'aun had done. What inspired Fir'aun was that he was God himself, or what inspired Fir'aun was basically all that he was doing. He was presenting it like, this is what inspired our civilization. This is where we get our strength from. So therefore, do not lose this, and so forth. Of course, and this is what Shaitan's, let's say, strongest tool is to convince you that your main inspiration is sin, and that sin is what gets you stronger. So that's why you would see, whether it's Hollywood movies or even the streets, that if you are, in order to appear cool, in order to appear like you're a person of strength, you would basically use drugs. You would basically, I guess, if it's a guy, you would get into women. If it's a girl, you would basically be strong and somehow go against a traditional thing, run away with your boyfriend or whatever it is, and probably even go go farther and probably, I don't know, be, blank, 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 you know what I mean? And that's basically what is presented as a person of power, a person that she's strong. She definitely was not being controlled, or he wasn't controlled. He knew what he wanted. He was basically going into a revolution against his parents, a revolution against the school, a revolution against this, and he would be presented, or she would be presented as well, that they're actually being powerful. So it becomes that the sin itself is giving them, let's say, this satanic inspiration, that's what makes you stronger, that's what makes you more powerful, that's what makes you in a bigger authority, that's what will get you into being independent. And that's the game that Shaitan plays on these people. So just to keep that in mind. And of course, you would see the Salihin presented that they're weak, that they're somehow, following the order, and there's no way. You want to keep in mind, like, for example, when you talk about the Darwin theory considers that it's the survival of the fittest, but the fittest is supposed to go against the norm. The survival of the fittest is supposed to go against the norm, and therefore it's your survival. And in order for you to survive, you have to go against the norm. You have to go against the principle. Because if you would follow the principle, that's it. You're going to get sucked in. You're going to die. You're eventually going to die. You're not going to basically carry on with the survival of the fittest. And what they mean by the fittest who basically manages to go against the norm, to go against their own nature, that's basically guarantee your survival. That's the whole idea that, of course, Darwin was presenting, whether we're speaking about the evolution theory or whether we're speaking about socially. There's also social evolution, that social evolution suggests the same. That in order for you to be in power, to be in the category of the fittest, you basically have to go against the norm. So if you are following the principles, you're following the norm, then in that situation, of course, you're being stereotyped that you are weak, that you're not strong, that you are basically not going to be surviving for long. You're going to lose it. You're not going to get a home. You're not going to get into success. You're just basically paving the way for your own failure and not for your success. And that social psychology, I would see it often on college campuses, where it can affect a lot of the Muslim students, and they would feel that if I don't join these groups, if I don't join these clubs, if I don't leave my hijab, then I'm just paving the way to my failure. I won't get a job. It's not going to look good on my CV. I'm not going to be capable of getting money. I'm not going to be capable of being successful in my dunya. So the way to basically, I do recognize Islam is right, but at the same time, la darar wa la dirar. Islam does not order you to get into harm or even harm yourself. So then they'll give themselves, of course, the evidences that are definitely taken out of context, and they'll apply it in the wrong place. And it becomes a diabolical interpretation. And without them realizing, it was mukhalatat ahl al-shar that got them confused about themselves, confused about their identity, confused about the places of power and where that is, confused about destinations of success. Because they're being told that what leads you to success is basically getting into that pride of sin, that sin is supposed to inspire you to get into that success, when in reality it was nothing but a satanic confusion that got us into this. So of course, going into the different hadith, we went into number one, the hadith that would tell us in regards to the friends and their influence, the impact that friends would have on us. We also went into, of course, that focus that at many times it's your appearance that matters, but of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Prophet were teaching us that it's not the appearance that matters, but it's actually the inside. Well, wait a minute. Does that mean I shouldn't have an appearance of a believer, for example? No. In fact, appearance does matter in how you would consider yourself. In other words, when you look at the different hadith, in particular, I would like to point out, even though it's not mentioned here, but in particular, the hadith where the Prophet ﷺ actually said that that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had cursed النامصة والمتنمصة عند الفالجة والمتفلجة عند الواشم والمستوشمة. That the Prophet ﷺ had said in that hadith that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had cursed the women that do nums, which is removing or certain way of, let's say, shaping the eyebrows in a certain way, or braiding the teeth in a certain way, or the person that does tattooing. So Tahir ibn Ashur explains that the reason why these are mentioned, and it's not exclusive to these categories, but anything that involves that you are trying to adapt, trying to somehow mimic a certain group of deviant people, and it's not exclusive to the teeth, it's not exclusive to the eyebrows, it's not exclusive to probably the tattooing, but it can actually include other things, perhaps fillers, perhaps those Botox, perhaps, dressing in a certain way, perhaps using certain words. They've got certain, of course, certain words that they might actually use. Often it becomes part of their vocabulary, etc., and it becomes cool to use these words, and etc. Basically is presented that you are modern, you're up to date, you're basically, I guess, you're somehow fitting in, etc., and therefore you're not traditional, not backwards, and therefore you are basically considered of a person of power. Okay, it's really strange how they convince themselves like that, but anyhow. What was the point so the point that I wanted to get to is that the hadith, the Prophet ﷺ was, according to Tahir ibn Ashur, was speaking about those elements, whether it's a person doing the actual thing or whether it's a person that it is being done to, in regards to teeth, eyebrows, and tattooing, etc., that such elements are talking about a certain culture that many of the people that are deviant might actually be using. So if a certain culture in appearance is a piercing, whatever it is, is basically a culture of a deviated group, then you dressing up or probably putting that on yourself and adapting to that culture of appearance would later on affect your heart, and that's why the Prophet ﷺ had cursed it. Okay, just keep that one in mind, because Islam is about telling you to focus on your heart. And shaitan, in the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had quoted on shaitan that shaitan had said, وَلَأَمُرَنَّهُمْ فَلْيُغَيِّرُنَّ خَلْقَ اللَّهِ, and that I will order them to change the creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In other words, shaitan had recognized that there's one tool that he could probably use in order to change what is within, because he knows he cannot control your heart. He can't control your heart, but he can control the way that you perceive yourself and the way that you would adapt to a certain society. And because this is part of your wiring, so he recognized that I could change the society, I could change the wiring, and I could basically play on that tool in order to get them basically into what I want them to get into, which is sucked in, of course, the satanic way. So what does shaitan use? Well, shaitan uses your appearance, uses how you adapt to a certain group of people, and uses changing your appearance as a method to change your fitrah, to change your instinct. That's the shaitan way to use things. So recognizes that that's an area, I guess, a gap that he can get into in order to affect the person's heart. So just keep that one in mind. لا تصاحب إلا مؤمنا ولا يأكل طعامك إلا تقي. And only bait. There was a very interesting study that was actually suggesting that who you eat with, or of course, your feelings during the time that you're eating. And that's basically going to determine how your body absorbs the food. So let's say you're eating while you're angry. The way your body absorbs the food during anger is different than the way your body absorbs the food during happiness. The way you absorb the food during, let's say, sorrow, etc. And that's why, for example, if you're really angry or if you're really sad and you're eating, you might throw up. Your body is sensing it as nothing but toxic. You would throw up. All right. And the same thing, it's not just the environment that you're with, that's also the people that you're with. What type of person are you eating with? Are you eating with someone that you love? Are you eating with someone that you hate? Are you feeling at that moment that you're really engaging in all of this? Or are you feeling that it's affecting you, it's harming you, you're not really enjoying the meal, etc.? Well, that's the same thing. The Prophet ﷺ was telling you, because there is an impact, there is an influence, how you eat, who you eat with, etc. So the Prophet ﷺ was telling you, make sure you eat with a believer when you're eating, because it will have its impact on your brain and on your heart as well. The words, who you company, whether going to a restaurant, drinking a cup of coffee, whatever it is, that's very important to keep in mind. That make sure you get into and get yourself with a group of salihin to get you stronger in faith. And we also talked about getting, I guess, the power to have in changing wronghood, and certainly making sure that we would weigh our ordering for what is good, forbidding what is bad. Make sure that we would weigh it and it does not bring a bigger harm. Okay, we also talked about this. من لا يواسيك في نفسك ولا يرفعك في دينك فلا تصاحب. And I promised that I would research this one, although this one says, look at this, رواه ابن المبارك, and that it was a hadith. It is not actually a hadith, but it turned out that it was nothing but a wording that is of some salihin that had mentioned it. So what does it mean anyways? Do not associate with one who does not support you in your soul and does not elevate you in your religion. So I said it, the wording is actually true, but it's not necessarily a hadith. We also went in talking about, well, not only avoiding, let's say, the toxic areas, the areas that are taking you away from your deen, but we also said there's an importance in engaging with the salihin, whether it's been with those that love Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, love for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And what does it mean to love for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? That the reason why you are loving or embracing that person, or you're associating with that person, is because you recognize that they are actually good people. You recognize that their interest is not of a financial interest that you're centered around. So it's not that they're giving you money, or your center is that these people are providing you with dunya, but you recognize that these people provide me not with dunya, but these people provide me with the faith, religious inspiration to help me grow in my deen. So that's al-hub fillah. That's the love for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make us from those. And certainly they would gather in different gatherings, whether it's yatluna kitab Allah, reciting the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, yatadarasunahu bainahum. They're probably studying maybe tafsir together, probably studying hadith together. Then that's what you're going to see. That's going to be covering them, even if they're probably using Zoom or probably on YouTube. At the end of the day, the effect is going to be the same there, whether it's gathering virtually or in person. At the end, you will see that one thing that the malaika would cover them with, which is one, sakina, tranquility. Two, ghashiyatuhum rahma. They'll basically get, of course, mercy. They're feeling a different type of compassion. They're feeling soft. They're feeling the mercy. They're getting that inspiration, and the malaika would basically be surrounding them, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would mention their names and be proud of these people, and tell them, start boasting about them in front of the malaika that are around Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And certainly, we don't want to just talk about avoiding bad people, but of course, the Prophet ﷺ was definitely encouraging us to be around and determine who the person that we're associating with and who our best friend is. You got to make sure you look at and find the right people in order to not get sucked in the wrong places. So a man will be with those whom he loves. Well, it's actually a man will be with the person that he loves the most. And what does it mean that they are with? So that actually means on Judgment Day, when the sun gets near our heads, that means the person that you're going to be with, sorry, I had to sneeze. The person that you're going to be with, alhamdulillah, is basically the person that you were accompanying in this dunya. So on Judgment Day, the person that you're going to be lined up with is basically the person that you were constantly engaging in, probably going, maybe, I don't know, going to the masjid, going to the halaqah, probably engaging together, probably to research, etc. Then that's in that situation, just letting you know. I actually wanted to go to this subject too, the importance of brotherhood / sisterhood. Let's look at this one. The Prophet ﷺ said, لا يؤمن أحدكم حتى يحب لأخيه ما يحب لنفسه. So what does that mean? Well, first of all, this hadith is narrated by Bukhari and Muslim. You would not be a believer unless you would love for your Muslim brother or sister what you would love for yourself. Unless you would love for them what you would love for yourself. And what does that mean? Yes, definitely, it's the golden rule that in order to really be a person of principle, well, love for others what you would love for yourself, basically. That's the golden rule. And here it is, the Prophet ﷺ is also teaching us that the golden rule still, it is basically a main key to determine whether you really are a believer, whether you really are living the principle and you're not living your interests. What's the difference? A person that is living their interest, the second that you would conflict with their interest, they're willing to let you go. In fact, they'll probably be fighting you, because to them, their interest is what they would consider as their center and the place of importance. And it's not you. You just happen to be a person that's on the side, probably as their place of entertainment. The second you would conflict with their interests, that's when they're willing to basically attack you, because to them, they're that interest. Of course, if this person la yu'min, if this person is not a believer, if this person, of course, is believing in their interest, then in that situation, they're definitely going to consider that if somebody conflicts with their interest, because that's their first faith, that's their God, then in that situation, they're willing to give up on you because their God says that they have to secure their interest, even if it's at the expense of losing you. But a believer, so that's why the Prophet ﷺ said, لا يؤمن أحدكم. You would not be a believer unless you recognize that your interest basically is not your center, but your interest is basically the brotherhood. That's your interest. Your interest is the principle and not necessarily your selfish interest. So that's basically teaching us right there that those people that are toxic, those people that are narcissist, etc. Of course, that's the key. That's the key thing that they would basically live against, because they would consider that it's my interest. If you're not working towards my interest, I'm going to ditch you. I'm going to probably attack you. I'm going to defame you. I'm going to go after you because you're supposed to be in my service, working towards my service. If you're not working towards my service, then in that situation, I would give myself the justification to attack you in any way possible in order to get in power and back in power, because they had viewed that person, that person was supposed to be working for them. So just be careful right there. So the Prophet ﷺ was telling us, well, the person wouldn't be a believer unless they love for their Muslim brother what they would love for themselves. What do they love for themselves? Whether it's loving, let's say, stability, whether it's a success, whether it's loving money as well, whether it's loving that they would get a good family, they would not feel, and envy is one key thing that many times toxic people would try to conceal. You want to keep in mind, these people are not going to tell you they're toxic. And just like, for example, you would have the worst of the thieves are actually dressed in suits. They're dressed in the neatest clothes. And certainly, the evil people will come to you like they care about you. They're there to help you, give you a nice advice. They would come in an appearance that they're there to just be for and at your service. And it's just for you. It's just you're the most important thing in their life. And without you realizing, they would manipulate you. And then when the real thing happens, they'll let you go. And they will definitely be the first ones to be happy of your failure. And that's why you see Fir'aun always would say, إِنِّي أَخَافُ أَن يُبَدِّلَ دِينَكُمْ أَوْ يُظْهِرَ فِي الْأَرْضِ الْفَسَادِ. Fir'aun would present himself like he is trying to protect a society, trying to take them into success. And he said, I fear that Musa is going to be changing the principles that this nation was founded on. Or he will bring corruption within the society. Fir'aun, who is ordering for the killing of children. That you want to keep in mind, a lot of those most evil people would have the sweetest way of saying things. They would be exactly like the politicians. Very diplomatic. They wouldn't necessarily come in angry. They would come in with a sweet talk, like they care about you, like they're trying to bring you into success and all of that, when in reality, what they really carry with them, you want to keep in mind, snakes, they've got the most beautiful appearance, the most beautiful designs. Most beautiful appearance. And they would come in the most silent way, except a rattlesnake, but they would come in the most silent way. You would not even know that there's a snake. They would hide. They would basically they would come in. You wouldn't even feel no steps, no footsteps, no nothing. And then they would come in and then bang, you just got right there, just got, of course, by a snake coming at you. It's coming in that it is presenting to you a very smooth, very beautiful appearance and coming in, and that it's basically right there, coming in with a tongue of two. With a tongue of two, a split tongue. Come in, one tongue is speaking against you, another tongue is basically presenting it like it's basically coming for you. You want to be careful. Make sure when you are friends with someone, make sure that they're people of principle, because if they're not people of principle, trust me, the second you conflict with their interest, they'll be coming at you. But I was friends with certain people that were hijabis, they were Muslim, they were praying, but they weren't actually like that. Well, they've got a problem. It doesn't mean that the principle has a problem. They're the ones that had a problem, not the principle itself. The principle itself, the principles of Islam, were basically teaching them that they're supposed to live the principle, that they're supposed to be caring for you, that they're supposed to be living the principle, to be there when you really needed them, to be there, living the principles of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But the second that they basically flipped is just telling you that they're the ones that really need to work on their Islam, and that the problem is not with Islam, the problem is with them. Just keep that one in mind. لا تدخلوا الجنة حتى تؤمنوا ولا تؤمنوا حتى تحابوا أولا أدلكم على شيء إذا فعلتموه تحاببتم أفشوا السلام بينكم. So in this hadith, the Prophet ﷺ basically tells us you would not enter Jannah until you would embrace faith. And you would not embrace faith unless you would love one another. Should I not show you off to something? If you were to do it, you would love one another. Then afshu salama bainakum, spread peace amongst you. So a couple things. لا تدخلوا الجنة حتى تؤمنوا. You would not enter Jannah unless you would believe. In other words, we know that one. Because if a person engages in shirk, that's basically determining that they will not enter Jannah. Okay, let's go for the second one. لا تؤمنوا حتى تحبوا. You would not be considered as believers unless you love one another. Is it possible that someone can be a believer and still have hate in their heart? Well, it is possible, but this is actually talking about a certain level of faith. This is not talking about Islam. A person that is in a state of Islam, it is possible that that's the early stage. That's the first stage. The stage of Islam, it is possible that the person is probably praying, probably, trying to keep a guess part of their Islam in place, but then, of course, probably still engaging in envy, probably hate, and probably backbiting. Backbiting is the worst thing. And usually that's the first card. That's the first flag in knowing how that person relates to you behind your presence and when you're not present. If they're backbiting other people, know that behind your back, they're doing the same and engaging in the same about you, but you just don't know it. Why would we say that? Well, because this is a habit. If this is that person's way of doing things, that's what they'll display. So they'll display what their habit really is so adapted to, or so engaged in, or so hooked on, and they'll display it in front of you. It may appear that they're just talking about X or Y. And behind your back, you're going to be X and Y. You're going to be X and Y, and you're going to be the subject that they would talk about when they're with other people, because that's all they master. They only master talking about people. And I would always say, don't talk about people, because you want to keep in mind that one day this is going to be reaching them. And certainly, if you thought you were going to get away with it, of course, maybe with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you're definitely not going to get away with it with these people. It's going to come back to you. It's going to come back to you. And why are you right there thinking that you're going to get away with it and that it's going to stay as a confidential information that you're probably talking about? It will circulate, it will be passed on, and especially ladies. Ladies, advice. If you want something to stay confidential, please keep it confidential. Don't think that by telling it to your girlfriend or your friend, especially in girls, they don't know what it means to be confidential. Unfortunately, sorry, ladies. They'll talk about it with their husbands, talk about it with their friends, talk about it here and there, and because they'll basically feel that I have to get it out of my system. If a person is continuously talking, then that's a red flag that this person just is not capable of classifying what is to be talked about and what is not to be talked about. It becomes camouflaged. It becomes all in one. I'm not saying go and tell the guys, but I'm just saying learn how to keep your information as much as you can to yourself. Because if it's an area of weakness or an area of trouble, you definitely don't want to be identified through your weakness. Just keep that in mind. Because if you start speaking about your weaknesses, your areas of pain, then what you're letting people identify you through is that you're a person of failures, you're a person of pain, you're a person that just doesn't know how to get to their success, and therefore you're a person of weakness. That's the identity that people will portray for you. And guess what? The second that that's going to be your image, the more vulnerable you will become, because many of those toxic people prey on people that are weak. They look for these kind of people in order to prey on them. So yes, sometimes it's important to just remember, I don't want to say sometimes, but I will say Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us about, of course, إِنَّمَا أَشْكُو بَثِّي وَحُزْنِي إِلَى اللَّهِ. I would complain my sorrow, my sadness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and I know what you don't know. There are certain things, yes, certainly, even if you're asking a fatwa, be as anonymous as you can. Don't display your weaknesses. Men tend to actually do a better job on that than women, because they recognize that, hey, if I were to display my weaknesses, they'll be out there, those guys that are abusing it. And believe it or not, that's why we even had better masculinity back then than today, because it was all about basically not crying if you're in pain, not complaining if you're in pain. You're supposed to maintain stamina. You're supposed to maintain power. That's what it means to be a man. That's what it means to be in power, etc. I know it many times. I know that many times it can be at the expense of a person's psychology. But then, of course, you want to keep in mind, إِنَّمَا أَشْكُو بَثِّي وَحُزْنِي إِلَى اللَّهِ. Unless we're talking about an illness, and that's a different story, okay? Well, then that's a different story. But I'm talking about in our general culture, it's important to live strong by learning how to get the inspiration from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and no, you do not have to share everything with your friends. And no, you do not, even if she's a salihah friend, you do not have to share everything. Try to focus on how to grow your faith and not how to express yourself all the time. Because the second that you're just focused on expressing yourself, you become too exposed and too transparent to people. Even if this person might appear as a salih person, you must maintain a certain level, I would say, of preserving your matters private, because you don't want anybody, and even yourself, to identify you as weak. You don't even want to identify yourself as weak. Even yourself, yes, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was right there wanting you, Allahu Akbar, wanting you to identify yourself as, I'm holding on to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, therefore I'm strong. Yes, even Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wanted you to identify yourself and see that you're a person of courage, that you're a person of strength, you're a person of inspiration, you're a person of power. Why? Because you connect to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's why a Muslim is basically strong. That's what it means. That you don't scrutinize those areas of weakness and then end up feeling too weak. But you would scrutinize those areas of strength, and you would yourself let your identity for your brain that I'm a strong person. I can do this. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give me the power. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give you the success, etc. So let's go for that point. لا تؤمنوا حتى تحابوا. You would not be believers unless you loved one another. Unless you loved one another. What does it mean to love one another? To love one another actually means to live the principle and not the interest. How? Because the second that you're living the principle, that's when you would feel that we're with these people as a team. We're with these people as a team, supporting one another, and therefore our goal is the principle. So these people would inspire me to live the principle. These people would support me to live the principle. These people would correct me when I'm not living the principle. These people would also encourage me to live the principle. That's why I would love these people, because I would say that they're on my team. I would say that I belong to them and they belong to me, and we're all heading towards the same goal, Jannah. لا تؤمنوا حتى تحابوا. You would have to love. Is it possible though that it can happen that a believer, like she's a really good Muslim, that guy or that girl is a really good Muslim. Let's just say husband and wife, okay? Husband and wife. She's a really good Muslim and he's a really good Muslim, but they cannot stand each other, and it happened that they basically got divorced. Is it possible? It is possible. And, subhanAllah, I mean, it happened even during the time of the Prophet ﷺ. You had Zayd ibn Haritha and you had Zainab bint Jahsh. She couldn't handle living with him. He was definitely a Sahabi that the Prophet ﷺ even said he was in Jannah. And this is Zainab bint Jahsh. The Prophet ﷺ said in the hadith, the one with the longest hand is the one that's going to basically follow me the first. In other words, follow me to Jannah. And it was Zainab bint Jahsh. They were reaching out their arms and so happy. Let's see who has the longest arm and so forth. But it wasn't the longest one. In other words, in their anatomy and their in their physically longest arm. It was the one that was most generous in giving donations, and that was Zainab bint Jahsh. Okay. So Zainab bint Jahsh was definitely a woman of faith. Well, so was Zayd ibn Haritha. He was also a man of faith, but their life was impossible together. Let's look at another example. Zubayr ibn al-Awwam. Zubayr ibn al-Awwam he was one of the 10 people promised Jannah. He was married to Asma bint Abu Bakr as-Siddiq. Asma, the daughter of Bakr as-Siddiq. And they got divorced. And you would see other examples. Maybe Zayd, with Thabit ibn Qais. Thabit, the Prophet ﷺ actually said, Thabit, Thabitun fil Jannah. Thabit is steadfast, is still, is strong, is rooted in Jannah. But his wife, Fatima, she said she wasn't interested. In fact, she literally said, I have no criticism, not over his faith and not over his mannerisms, but didn't click. Didn't click, was not my type. That's it. She couldn't even complain. She couldn't find anything about his deen and about his akhlaq. The best, A. But didn't click. It can happen. It can happen that you can have certain people that are actually good, but then they didn't click and they just didn't, I guess, blend together. And just keep that one in mind. And it can happen, of course, that people can get into arguments. And I would like to say, especially if you were to get into husband and wife arguments, they can be discussing the same thing, but each one is probably accusing the other of lying. And sometimes it's not lying per se, it's having a different narrative. She's focused on one thing and he's focused on another thing, and each one is coming from a different narrative, coming from a different angle, and it would appear to the other person that that's a lie. Most problems actually come because of our interpretation of people's intention and the motives. We're doing the exact same thing, but I would accuse your intention that you did it because you wanted to get A, B, C goals. And it's usually going to be goals that fit your interest. And you would accuse me of doing the same thing, that the reason and the motive behind, and that somehow you discovered the motive behind why I'm doing A, B, C is because of an ill motive. And it is A, B, C that is revealing nothing but the evil spirit that I or you might contain. And that's why the Prophet ﷺ said, وَلَا تُؤْمِنُوا حَتَّى تَحَابُوا. You would not be believers unless you would love one another. But there is one thing I would like to say. On Judgment Day, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَنَزَعْنَا مَا فِي قُلُوبِهِمْ مِنْ غِلٍّ إِخْوَانًا عَلَى سُرُرٍ مُتَقَابِلِينَ. There's going to be a station. Of course, there are different stations before entering Judgment Day, but there is a certain station where, yes, certainly the person had passed hellfire. So they're at the, let's call it the campus or the field right in front of Jannah. The Salihin had already, they pass all those stations, Il-Mizan, Sirat, and right now, right there, right in front of, let's call it the front yard of Al-Jannah. But then they can't enter Jannah because they had what? Well, they had animosity towards one another. So they passed all the different things back then and the Sirat and everything. Yes, they did. Now they're standing right at the threshold of Jannah, but they cannot enter it because they still have some animosity towards one another. But Jannah does not know hatred, does not know animosity. So we definitely need to get you pured before you would enter Jannah. And when you look at this ayah, that tells us that it can be possible that two are actually good believers, but of course, those that are out there, they might see that, which one is right, but each one has a different narrative. It's so hard sometimes to, I guess, sift these narratives and really see what is going on. And we're usually trying to search for the motive, which is really incognito. You're not going to be capable of figuring it out because it's completely hidden. So then when they would pass all of those, it would definitely reveal that these people didn't actually have an ill motive. They just misinterpreted things. But there's right there at the threshold of Jannah, but they cannot enter Jannah because they still have hatred, animosity within themselves. So what's going to happen? They're going to stay out there and become Ashab al-A'raf all of a sudden? No. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, وَنَزَعْنَا. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will cleanse them. And certainly there will be some certain trades, and there will be, well, you still owe that believer something, you still owe that other believer something. And then, of course, in order to get you, now we're all going to Jannah, but now we're going to determine how much of a level and what privileges you're going to get in Jannah. How much privileges are you going to get in Jannah is basically, now we're going to do another type of sifting. Let's say you had harmed such a believer this much. Well, we need to deduct from your hasanat and give it to them, or deduct from their sayyi'at and give it to you. And then in order to determine, probably, finally, this is what level and what, I guess, what level of Jannah and what level of privileges you're going to get in Jannah. Yes, absolutely. There's a certain class even in Jannah. What class are you going to be from? Are you going to be the class that is from الصديقين, الشهداء, الصالحين, الأنبياء? Are you going to be from the class that basically is lower? Yeah, a little lower. Yeah, they generally do a really good job in being committed to their faith. They'll have some shortcomings here and there, but you've got, of course, the others. They'll have a lot of shortcomings. They passed already probably Jahannam, nasallahu al-afwa wal-afiyah, but they'll have a lot of shortcomings. And you've got the other kind. No, they actually still have to do Jahannam time. And then once they do their Jahannam time, they would have to basically, after that, pass through, I guess, after doing their Jahannam time, then they would have to pass through.
That's so scary.
That's so scary.
I was watching something and it was showing the lava.
Right.
Ya Allah.
Ya Allah, exactly.
And it's just burning everything, including the water.
You know, I was listening the other day, if you are to drop an atomic bomb inside a volcano, before the atomic bomb would even explode, the lava would just boom right there. It would just explode it. It would just burn it all up in just seconds. But then the other elements in it would later on probably start exploding, all right, the uranium in it, and then that would actually cause a bigger disaster than the lava going out in a way where it is probably, I would say, to a certain level, it's I guess, organized way of spewing all the lava out. But if you were to explode it, then you're letting more lava come out, and you're letting it go out in a way that is probably far too dangerous. Well, then you're not only getting lava out, but then you would be getting out uranium, which would now be spread far beyond than what lava is spreading. Ya Allah. It's so scary. يا ربي نسأل الله العفو والعافية. All right. أولا أدلكم على شيء إذا فعلتموه تحاببتم. Should I not show you off to something? If you were to do it, you would love one another. And the Prophet ﷺ said, أفشوا السلام بينكم. Just spread salam amongst you, the greetings. Take the time to say salamu alaykum. Take the time to mean it. Take the time to really embrace it and not just say it a word of mouth. Let's see. Look at this one. The Prophet ﷺ in this hadith, إِذَا أَحَبَّ الرَّجُلُ أَخَاهُ فَلْيُخْبِرْهُ أَنَّهُ يُحِبُّهُ. if a man loves another, okay? It's not loving a boy or loving a girl, girl loving boy, okay? Oh my God, I actually had one time a girl say that she had heard this hadith, إذا أحب الرجل أخاه فليخبره أنه يحبه, and she said she read this hadith and she went to tell a guy that she loves him for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. No, absolutely not. All right. Absolutely not.
Maybe
This
that
is
was
a
just an
fitna.
excuse. I mean,
Believe it or not, Noura, I used to think some people are, faking it, but it turned out that because of the lack of ilm, many people, their innocence comes in as nothing but stupidity, complete stupidity, and very naive. Sorry to say it that way, but make sure you learn Islam right and how it's applied and not take things out of context. Okay. إذا أحب رجل أخاه فليخبره أنه يحبه. If you love your Muslim sister, sorry about that, then tell him that you love him. All right? Then tell him that you love him. And it's subhanAllah. And want to say a story. Well, maybe I shouldn't. Okay, we're live. Okay, let's go for another hadith. لا يؤمن أحدكم حتى أكون أحب إليه من ولده ووالده والناس أجمعين. As you can see, this hadith is narrated by Bukhari and Muslim. You would not be a believer unless the Prophet ﷺ would be more beloved to you than your own children, than your own parents, and than all people. Wait a minute. Why do we have to love the Prophet ﷺ? Because you would recognize that he is the main person that demonstrated al-wahy for you. In other words, as a person, you would recognize that he carries the inspiration in action, and therefore you would recognize that he was the infallible one to demonstrate what Islam really had called for, and you would love the principle. So loving the Prophet ﷺ is really loving the inspiration, is loving the principle, is really loving Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for sending such principles, is really embracing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's what you're trying to embrace. You're really trying to embrace Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through the Prophet ﷺ. And of course, this isn't in any way shirk, but you're recognizing that the prophets themselves are supposed to be your first place of love, because you recognize that the prophets, okay, are supposed to be this area that demonstrated principle, this demonstrated how we would embrace everything in principle. And you recognize that to you, the principle in itself is more beloved than any other embracement. Because an embracement, probably embracing your child, probably embracing your parents, is more of a blood embracement. In other words, it's more of a natural embracement, that you love your parents because certainly because of what they had invested in you. Certainly that's an important love. And you love your child because you would see through your child, of course, your successes, your at least, especially when they're young, and when they're older, you would see in them your support, at least used to be. Allah al-musta'an, ya Allah. Raising children is way harder than you would think. It's so weird that your children would actually doubt that you love them. I can't wrap that around my head. And I would say, even if your parents are from a different faith, don't doubt their love to you. don't doubt their love to you. Because subhanAllah, it's actually part of our nature that we would love our children unless that person was really toxic. Yes, it can happen. If this person was way off their nature and some people are just evil, man. Okay. But don't doubt your parents' love to you, and try as much as you can to express your love to them, because your parents, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was always telling you, yusikumullah, and He would tell you about the wasiyah, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَقَضَى رَبُّكَ أَلَّا تَعْبُدُوا إِلَّا إِيَّاهُ وَبِالْوَالِدَيْنِ إِحْسَانًا, be good to your parents. You got so many different ayat talking to you about your parents. But you only had one ayah, yusikumullah fi awladikum. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is giving you that wasiyah, that will, when it comes to distributing inheritance or money onto your children, that you would be fair in that regards. So just keep that one in mind. Just keep that one in mind. Many times we can get carried away thinking that we can somehow just display and easily display our parents. They're toxic. They don't care. They just want to do things just to be authoritative, etc., but not realize that even if they're not Muslim, they actually thought, in their aim and their motive was really to make you successful. Yes, to them, the path to success probably goes through Jesus Christ. Or probably to them, probably goes through whatever path, Buddhism, whatever it is. But they would still be, I guess, so indulged into trying to get you into that. The reason why? So see their commitment to get you into that as, well, they really love you. But yes, love can go wrong. But just don't doubt their love, because it's a form of uquq. It's a form of mistreating your parents to doubt their love. Definitely do not doubt their love. But at least reach out to that area that, I know you love me. I know you want the best for me. But can I right there just show you that this is what Islam says? This is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that's why even Ibrahim alayhi salam, Ya abati, la ta'bud al-shaytan. Ya abati, he would constantly and continuously, dear father. He was always telling him, dear father, because he wanted to display that I'm not here trying to parent you at all. I recognize your love for me, but dear father, please let me show you where your misconception, your confusion had gone wrong. And this is important. If you come to your parent from the angle that you're parenting them, that's when they just shut down and they're not going to listen to you. So right there, what you're really living, لا يؤمن أحدكم حتى أكون أحب إليه من ولده ووالده والناس أجمعين. You would embrace the Prophet ﷺ, you would love the principle and what resembles the principle, which is the Prophet ﷺ or Quran or Islam, and that should be your number one place of love. And what does it mean to love something? What it means to love is actually meaning that you're willing to give up on anything just for the sake of that principle or that, I guess, embracement. It's a trade-off. There's no way that you can love deen and dunya at the same time. There's no way that you can love al-akhirah and love everything about dunya. There's a certain trade-off. There's no way. There's no way that you want to be successful and become, I don't know, a person of success and at the same time get into all that entertainment. You want to be successful in school? Well, you got to make sure that you spend a lot of time in making that love for your schooling actually be in place and get good grades. Invest your time, invest your energy, invest your potentials, invest your focus. There's no way. You got to put your focus, you got to put your energy, you got to put your potentials, you got to put, of course, your focus in that, or else there's no way that you're going to get into success, no matter what success, whether this is a dunya success or an akhirah success. ثلاثة من كن فيه وجد حلاوة الإيمان. This is going to be the last hadith. 3, whoever finds this within their heart, they would be the ones to have found faith in them. أن يكون الله ورسوله أحب إليه مما سواهما وأن يحب المرء لا يحبه إلا لله وأن يكره أن يعود في الكفر كما يكره أن يقذف في النار. Whoever finds these 3 things, then those are the people that found the beauty of faith. Number 1, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His Messenger would be the most beloved thing more than anything. And that they would love a person only for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And they would hate to go to disbelief as much as they would hate to be thrown in fire. There's a lot to say in regards to this hadith. So number 1, that they would love Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allahu Akbar. 2, in practice, the society, the environment that they're putting themselves in is based on the love for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And certainly you can't just have love in place, but you also have to be clear about what you hate and what you separate yourself from. There's no way. If you love justice, that means you hate injustice. It's by definition. And that's the same thing. If you love faith, that means you would hate all the different things that basically would take you out of faith. If you love faith, that means you love principles of faith. You love Sharia. And therefore, you would hate the other path that probably is going against Sharia, going against Islam. It's by definition. But of course, the hadith would clarify the definition for us because we could easily fall in dichotomies without us realizing. So sometimes in order to make sure we're not putting those areas in murky lines and murky borders, it's important to bring about a clarification that yes, certainly there's love and there's hate. There's no way. If you love Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that means you gotta hate shaitan. If you love Sharia, that means you gotta hate going against Sharia. You love the Prophet ﷺ, that means you would hate any practice that the Prophet ﷺ did not love. There's no way. And certainly that doesn't necessarily mean I'm going to be attacking, and being violent to those people. But I'm basically drawing these lines where I'm distancing myself away from such parameters, from such paths, from such paradigms, from such environments, from such people. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make us from those, inshallah. We will. I know I have a class to make up, but inshallah, we'll be continuing next week with the pearls. I'm excited because we still got a couple of hadith that we really need to cover, and inshallah, stay tuned and more to come. If there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. I guess everybody, it doesn't have to be a question. It can be something that you would like to probably add. Maybe I missed something. misworded something, definitely that's all right. Correct me. Don't look at me as a teacher, but look at me as a friend too, because remember, we're supporting one another. Go ahead and say it,
Assalamualaikum,
Ahmed.
Ustad Ha.
Walaikum salam. Go ahead, dear.
Yeah, I have it's kind of a relevant question because like this is something that I'm dealing with more recently. Is the struggle of balancing practicing Islam and being a good Muslim while also like being put in situations where you're tested even in Muslim spaces. So like I think the question that I wanted to ask you is especially in like being as vague as possible, um in a community that is struggling with division and various events being held around the city kind of thing, would it be more contributing to further division by actively choosing not to attend events that are taking place in places that you know, or I guess, I don't even know how to word it without being vague, but like an event being held in a place that you don't feel that you know is a deviant group that you can't confidently be in and know that you're in it kind of in a good place. You know what I mean? So like, would it be more harmful to not go, or would it be more harmful in favor of uniting the ummah in this way, to not go? And
You
it's
know,
kind of a
dear,
tricky balance.
the most important thing is getting your own salvation. Make sure that you are getting Jannah. If you had, let's say, more time to contribute to help others get into Jannah, well, good for you. But the most important thing that you want to focus on is yourself. That's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala actually tells the Prophet ﷺ, لَسْتَ عَلَيْهِمْ بِمُسَيْطِرٍ. You cannot control them. They have to choose their own path. And you don't want to always somehow, so sometimes I would say there's a certain culture, especially perhaps in the West, diplomacy. And diplomacy, although presented as trying to be tolerant, trying to be inclusive, it can sometimes carry a lot of hypocrisy. It can carry a lot of hypocrisy. So I would say and recommend living the principle that you recognize that this is not deviation, living your principle and not necessarily wanting to be diplomatic and sometimes wanting to bring about inclusivity, tolerance, and all of that language and etc. Work towards your own salvation. Work towards instilling what is right, even if you don't have many people supporting you, and even if you don't have people giving you the backup, or even if you are alone on the path. And this is what the prophets and the messengers were always teaching us. You could be alone, and it doesn't matter how many people would follow. As long as you are doing the right thing. Doesn't matter how many people are following. You could give the advice, but it's not going to be at the expense of your own salvation. Definitely not at the expense of your own salvation. I cannot help other people at the expense of my own life, my own salvation. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we're not here talking about dunya. We're talking about akhirah. Prophet Nuh alayhi salam. He didn't have a lot of people. Didn't have a lot of followers. Didn't even get the publicity that was in his favor. In fact, they were all against him, all mocking him, all, of course, speaking against him. He was really appearing, the interesting one, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had said that he had stayed ألف سنة إلا 50 عام, or 50 عام. And the sana, the word, even though they in English they both mean year, the sana and also the sana and am, they really mean the same thing. But in Lugha Arabiya, no, it doesn't really mean the same thing, because in Lugha Arabiya, it actually means that the sana, the year, is basically containing a lot of hardship. It comes from sinna. It comes from weakness. It comes from al-sinin, which basically means al-qahd, which basically means the years of infertility, years of course, hardship, etc. But al-am actually means that there's an area of rest. So 900 فلبث.
Just like Surah Yusuf.
Absolutely. فلبث فيهم 1000 سنة إلا 50 عاما. So only 50 عاما, or only 50 years, was he really finally taking the time to rest and just let them be. But all the 1000 سنة إلا 50 عاما, those were the hardest years of his life. Just imagine, if we're talking about mental health, just imagine you're being mocked at, you're being isolated economically, socially, and you're right there. Even your wife is not on the same page. Divided the family. The child is believing one thing, the other one's believing one thing. It just caused a division. And now you're being accused that you're the cause why our family is breaking up. And here you are. Just imagine that. You're being presented as the one that destructed the family, the one that destructed the society, the one that is nothing but toxic, the one that is nothing but a narcissist. And yes, you're being presented like that. That's what Noah was presented at. So just be careful, and definitely not at the expense of your salvation, and not at the expense of truth are you necessarily going to live a certain level of diplomacy. There are certain grounds that you really, and certain borders that you really have to maintain. So it depends on what deviant group you're talking about. I don't know what groups you're talking about, but this inclusivity had actually made a lot of things fluid. And you want to be careful with that. Not everything we would necessarily be fluid in. There are certain times where we just have to draw a border, a line, and say, this is where halal begins and this is where haram starts. This is where innovation is, and this is where sunnah is. This is where you had gone deviant, and this is where you're on the right track. This is where Sharia is, and this is where you confuse Sharia. So that only comes with ilm. So you don't always, definitely don't take my words out of context and start thinking that I'm here encouraging division. But there are certain areas that you definitely need to separate yourself from, and certain areas that different scholars had different opinions on. I wouldn't necessarily just regard that is necessarily a deviation and just so much insist on it. It depends on which area you're talking about. But I would say, in order to help you identify those borders, definitely get the ilm, and inshallah you'll be able to know which areas I can be somewhat embracing, even if I may disagree with and not consider it as the preponderant. But I do recognize that some scholars had basically considered that is a considerable opinion. Well, that I can be inclusive to. You see what I'm saying? I hope I answered that question, dear.
Yeah, absolutely. Jazakallah khair. I really appreciate it.
وإياكم. So this is it, inshallah. We'll see you all tomorrow for our